I'm Sarah Wilson, and you're listening to the Roots and All Budcast. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Budcast. This week, I'm chatting to Olivia Kirk about low allergen planting. Olivia works on both public and private gardens, and she's got a number of show gardens under her belt, including a gold medal winning garden at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show. She specialises in healing gardens and has worked on a number of projects such as hospice gardens, where the effect the garden can have on a person's physical health is of paramount importance. And we often think about the positive effects on mental and physical health that gardens and green spaces can provide, but we don't often stop to think about the harm they might cause. So when I first heard about low allergen planting, I have to admit a bit of me inwardly groaned, because I was immediately thinking it might limit the palette of plants I can use, and it seemed like yet another constraint on gardening and more plants to cross off my list. But when I heard Olivia explain it, I was in for a real education, and she clearly explains how, with a little bit of knowledge and a few relatively simple steps, we can make our environment a much better place for everyone. I was just going to ask you a little bit about why low allergen planting is relevant to your work and what kind of made you so interested in it.
This started off with the project I did with the University of Worcester. They have the National Pollen Research Unit on their campus, back in 2010, they just had a new building and they wanted a low allergen garden put outside it. And so they asked me to design that because I was working with them already. And we actually decided through the process to do a low allergen garden for the University of Worcester. So that was really my first exposure to the possibility of low allergen planting. Up until then, to be honest, I've not even heard about it. But since then, because I work with hospices and I specialise in healing gardens, I have actually taken on planting generally planting low allergen plants into the gardens that I do in healthcare settings, because I think when people already have problems, why add to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who aren't aware, and I think probably that might be quite a lot of people, what is the problem with, obviously we know what the problem is with pollen in terms of causing allergies, but how does that relate back to the plants that you might choose to plant in a landscape?
Right, okay. Basically, I mean, there's a lot of different types of flowers, but really we can put those into three categories. There's perfect or complete flowers that have the male and the female parts within the flowers, and generally those flowers are pollinated by insects. So you would have the pollen and the nectar, the male and the female parts sitting in the same flower. And then there's monoecious plants, and they contain both male and female flowers. They're separate flowers, but they're on the same plant. And this is generally trees, but all hedging. And the pollen is trapped within the plant for the female flowers for pollination to happen. And then there's dioecious, which is separate sexed, either male plants or female plants. The females produce the seeds, berries, fruit, and so therefore low allergen, and the males produce the pollen. So those are the three different types of flowers that you're working with. And generally, when I'm planting for a low allergen garden, I will, as a rule of thumb, just avoid anything that's wind pollinated. Generally, anything that's insect pollinated is fine, because the pollen is sticky and heavy and quite big and designed to stick to the insects. Whereas with wind pollinated plants, the pollen is naturally light and airborne, and there's an awful lot of it because it's less of a precise method of pollination. So the wind pollinated plant pollen goes into the air in clouds, and that's the thing that we're trying to avoid really in a low allergen garden.
Okay, so when we go to a nursery and we're buying our trees or our hedging plants, are they mainly male or female?
Generally, they're mainly male, and this goes back to what councils want on street trees and public planting, because female flowers are deemed to be messy because they produce fruits, berries, seeds that drop on the pavement. Councils tend not to want this, and so the perception is that male plants aren't messy. But actually what they're doing is putting stuff into the air that's causing allergies. So you can't see it, but actually it's very messy. And I think because councils and civic planting, street planting, park planting tends to be non-messy, it tends to be male, and therefore there's a lot more requests for male plants, and therefore the nurseries have just specialised in cloning male plants rather than female. So there's an imbalance. I mean, right back in the 40s, 50s, there were very few allergies around, and there were male and female trees. I think it's the preponderance of male trees in our streetscapes now which is causing this imbalance and this problem. And therefore people that are atopic, which means they're more likely to develop allergies, are being overexposed to all of the, because of all of this preponderance of male species planting.
And I was reading Thomas Leo Ogren's book about it, which you recommended to me. And he was suggesting, it would be really good if we did introduce many more female trees into the landscapes and into our gardens, if we're concerned. Because, and also that would be of a benefit to insects, because the female trees will kind of attract the insects from a nectar perspective. If we were to kind of go full scale the other way towards planting female trees, would that have a detrimental effect on insects, say, that collected pollen?
I think not. I think it's much more about redressing the balance and getting a good mix of male and female. I mean, the honest truth is that a lot of nurseries don't actually know whether they're selling all male trees. I mean, since I've did my course at Kew that last month, I've been talking to nurseries, and there's a hedge specialist close to where I live in Worcestershire, and he didn't completely know that a lot of his trees were male. I mean, we had to think through all of the ones that produces berries, and of course there are plenty of choices that we have, but it's just a kind of lack of education on this subject. I don't think that pollinators are ever going to run out. And actually, if you run out of pollen, if in a low allergen garden setting, because actually what I concentrate on is pollen, is flowers, trees that are insect pollinated. And when I go back to those three that I gave you at the start of the interview, those with complete flowers or self-pollination, things that self-pollinate, both have the male and female parts. So it's not that we're actually going, if we went the other way, the bees wouldn't suffer, because all of the stuff that is bee pollinated or insect pollinated, it's more than bees, is generally low allergen.
Okay. So what are some of the more common plants in our landscapes that might be causing problems for people with allergies?
Yes, well, I think sycamores and plane trees. I mean, London is there's a lot of plane trees are used in cities because actually they absorb a lot of vehicle pollution. But plane trees also are wind pollinated, so they have the male and the female parts on the trees, but a lot more pollen than is necessary for fertilization. And so plane trees are ones that are definitely, they're up there right high on the top of the list of trees that cause allergens. And then things like the birch family are also, they're a popular choice with garden designers, but again, they have the male and the female flowers on the tree, on the same tree, and their pollen is super allergenic, and they also cross-react. This is the same type of pollen that hazel and alder use. So if you're allergic to silver birches or birches, and 25% of people in the UK are, then you're also going to get this cross-reaction with hazel and alder, which actually flower, that you see those catkins in January, February, March. So you could potentially have an allergic reaction right the way through to the end of June, which is something to be avoided. So birches are a good one to avoid as well.
And I think in the book it mentions things like ilex and taxus, which do they cause a problem as well?
Yes. to a certain extent, use all parts apart from the berries, but the seeds inside the berries are poisonous, and so they are separate sects. So if you've got a yew bush with berries on, you're absolutely fine because that's a female tree. If it hasn't, then it does actually produce clouds of fine white pollen when the males are in flower, and these is trigger for allergies, asthma, causes irritation to your eyes, nose and throat. So if you can avoid having a male yew really close to your house, because the other thing that you've got to remember is that the closer you are to the pollen being released, the more you're going to get in your nose and your eyes. If it's over the street or a mile away, then obviously you're going to have less of a hit. So it's not that these things are really bad for you unless they're very close to your house. But also with yews, you can see the berries forming really early on. So if you're going to go out and buy a yew, just have a good look and see if it's got berries forming. And in that case, you're going to be absolutely fine. Hollies, shall I just carry on with hollies?
Yes, please.
I mean, hollies less so. The male pollen, again, these are separate sects, but the potential for allergic reaction to holly pollen is not as severe as yew. And also, it's actually a lot easier to identify male and female hollies because generally nurseries will label them either female or male, and because to get the nice red berries that we all like for Christmas decorations, you want to know that you can have those. So you generally tend to need both a male and a female within close proximity to get those berries. Mm-hmm. There's a self-fertile, Nellie Stevens to an extent is self-fertile. JC Van Tol is a lovely holly. I use that quite a lot. It's not very prickly, and that's self-fertile as well. And you've also got to be just a little bit careful when you're buying hollies because Golden King, you would assume, is a male, but it's actually a female. And Golden Queen and there's an Ilex Victoria, they're both, you would assume they're female, but they're male. So you've just got to be a little bit careful. But hollies are definitely, they don't have the allergenic potential that yews do.
Okay. And another thing that I was reading about was the idea that, talking about yew plants, is the idea that you could have an allergy trapping hedge. So how do they work?
Well, yes, and this is quite a hot topic at the moment because the RHS is actually suggesting that hedges are really good to be planted in the streetscape because they are very good at trapping vehicle pollutants, which we've heard an awful lot about. And because they're densely foliated right down to ground level and therefore exhaust level, they're very good at catching the vehicle particulates that are very damaging to the inside of our lungs, and trapping them and absorbing them to a certain extent as well. And the same goes for pollen. If you have a good high, say 1.8, 6 foot hedge, then you are going to trap a lot of the air-blown pollen and particles that would otherwise come into your garden or into your school or if you live on a busy road. It's going to protect you. So on a lot of different levels, it's really good to have screens of hedging, and it's also good for wildlife too. And you can either have evergreen hedging, things like Prunus lusitanica, which is a low allergen evergreen hedge, or you could have beech. Hawthorn is also good. Now, obviously, hawthorn loses its leaves, so if that was if you had a fence as well as a hawthorn hedge, then you would be providing food for the birds as well as keeping your garden clean, and just purifying the air around you. Hedges are very good on lots of different levels, and actually, hedges better than trees at street level for mitigating exhaust fumes, because obviously with a tree you've got a lot of trunk before you get to the green canopy, but the fact that hedges come close down, so a combination of hedges And trees would be even better because you're catching pollutants high level and low level.
Yeah, that's a really good solution for anyone who does have a garden that's maybe situated somewhere where they can't escape or they can't control what's coming into the garden, but they can certainly put up a barrier.
Absolutely. You can sort of cocoon yourself, which is a good thing to do.
And I was really interested as well by the kind of aside from the pollen issue, there is a potential problem with mould in the garden. And I wondered if you could maybe mention a few of the practices that we might use in the garden that actually encourage the growth of mould and that we might want to avoid if we're trying to keep it, a kind of low allergen garden.
Yes, it is a thing that you have to consider. I mean, it's not as high up the list as wind-pollinated trees, but you do have to be careful because mould spores are equally as buoyant and can cause problems. So I think just be as clean as you possibly can. If you've got roses that have got black spot on their leaves, because that's a fungus, and they release spores, then just clear up dead leaves. Just make sure that you're keeping things from decaying in your garden as much as you can do. And similarly, putting bark mulches, as bark slowly rots down, then again, that causes problems. And keep your compost heaps well away from where people are sitting. I mean, you generally would do anyway, but just basically try to keep your garden free of things that are slowly rotting down. But anything that has rotted, that's fine. You can put it on, incorporate it into the soil. And obviously we all know about mulching our plants. It's good on many levels. But just make sure it's well rotted and keep your garden as clean and healthy as possible. So right plant, right place, so it's not going to get diseases. And if you've got healthy plants in your garden, that's clearing the air for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to consider that probably most people don't even think about. So it's fascinating.
Yes, absolutely, it is. But actually, it's not all doom and gloom. It's just changing small ways and planting more insect-pollinated plants, and you will have a healthier garden, and you will be less likely to develop colds, sneezes, and hay fever.
Can you just talk about the opals rating and also where people might be able to find low allergen plants?
Yes, the Thomas Ogren, who you mentioned earlier in the interview, has devised what he calls the Ogren Plant Allergy Scale, which is what opals is short for. And basically, he numbers plants from 1 to 10, 1 being the best and 10 being the worst. And basically, if you anything between a 1 and a 5 on the opals scale, even into 6s, if you're not going to plant densely, they're fine. They're all fine for in your garden. And he's written a wonderful book that you refer to called The Allergy Fighting Garden. And that's basically a couple of chapters on principles of low allergen gardening, and then a whole list of every plant that he feels that we need to know about. The only proviso what I would put is that he is American, and so there's some things in there that we wouldn't even think of planting because they would be too tender in our climate or just not available. But it's a good starter for 10. So if you were to buy the book, look at the opals rating, and also stick with the not planting wind-pollinated, planting insect-pollinated, then you're going to be good to go, definitely. As far as opals ratings in the nurseries, it's not anything that you're going to find. And I guess because if you have anything from a 7 to a 10 opals rating, you're basically saying don't buy it. So why would nurseries adopt that? There is one Guernsey-based nursery. Nigel Clark has a plant centre in Guernsey called Q, which is Queux, and all of his plants have opals ratings, and he is also dedicated to propagating female hedging plants. So he's totally online with it, but generally it's quite difficult to find a good steer in garden centres.
Well, I definitely think it's a question that people could ask their nursery, and be interesting to find out what the answer was.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, I found in the 9 years that I've been planting low allergen gardens, it's a lot of research that I've done myself. But it's quite difficult to find a lot of detailed information out there. Birmingham City Council did a low allergen Chelsea Flower Show garden last year. There's Allergy UK, which has also got a very good website that's got a lot of information on there. Or I have my own Instagram, Olivia Kirk Gardens Instagram, and I'm now posting low allergen plant combinations. So those are sources that people could just have a look at if they were interested.
And do you know of any international resources on this?
To be honest, I don't. I'm UK based, and the UK is where I buy my plants. Apart from Tom Ogren and his low allergy garden, and the other things that I've mentioned, those are my resources for what I plant. If there is anything on a more international scale, I haven't found it yet. But if anybody does, then do let me know.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think we're all going to be waiting with bated breath for your book on it.
I'm writing a book now, am I?
Well, yes, I think you should.
Right.
Just volunteered you.
Yeah, well, that's good. Something I am developing, actually, is I'm looking into, because the book thing has been mentioned, and quite possibly I will, but I'm looking at doing plant cards with the aim of helping garden designers and anybody else who's interested. They can buy cards as a kind of basic pack for the structure and the big things that you would want to plant in your garden. So it would be a card with a picture on the front, information on the back, and then kind of extension packs that can show different plant groupings that you could think of, or plants for the season, for different seasons. So that's something that I'm looking into doing at the moment, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I think that would make a brilliant addition to people's studios, or even if they're interested in it on a domestic scale. I think that would be invaluable.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm working on that with my daughter, who is a qualified graphic designer. So we're doing a collaboration over the summer and getting this together. So just keep watching my Instagram post or my website, and we'll have more information come the start of the new academic year, possibly.
Brilliant. Look forward to it. Thank you so much to Olivia for taking the time to explain the concept of low allergen planting. It's a really interesting area of horticulture that many people are passing over, so I was really grateful she took the time to come on the show and talk about it, and I hope you learned as much from our chat as I did. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next Tuesday.